Church, how are you doing this morning? Good, man. All kinds of stuff. I want to try that again. How are you doing this morning? Good, man. What an incredible way to lead us in a worship in what is a very special Sunday for us this morning. As we wrap up the series where we've been talking about stories and the power of each individual story. And I've been careful throughout this whole series to help us identify that each one of us, that we have to understand that we have a story. We have to look at what we can do to maximize our story. And then when those parts come that don't seem to fit in, to understand how that part of the story fits in with everything else we're doing. And the final piece of that entire puzzle we've been trying to put together is then once we realize our story and understand our story and why it's there and try to figure out how to maximize that, then to make sure from that point on that we're out telling our story. See, for me, when I was in high school, I didn't mind going to school. It wasn't my favorite activity. I love sports, and so I went to school. I did pretty well. But about the time I got into my junior year of high school, I had a friend of mine who was just kind of pouring into me. And he was working for the school newspaper. And he said, JJ, why don't you come and write sports for us? And I really like sports, so I said, man, that's a great way to get my foot in the door. And I started to do that, and I started to love just the power of being able to use printed media to be able to share stories. And so that began a process in my life where eventually for a while I was going into majoring in journalism at University of Florida. And I loved being able to use stories to affect people's lives. To this day, I still enjoy picking up a newspaper, or because we're more of a digital age now, being able to have it all online and to be able to read these stories that are really, really powerful stories, because whether it's in printed media, whether it's something we see in a TV show or a movie, for most of us, we love the power of story. But it was about that time when I was in college that Jesus had entered into my story and it changed my life. And I said, as much as stories in and of themselves are powerful, it's even more powerful when we can use the stories that we have to make a difference in people's lives. Not just because of the power of story, but because of the power of the one who created the story for us. To use our stories to point people to Jesus. Throughout all of last year, there was one story that I had a chance to be a casual bystander for, to kind of see, actually over the course of the past couple of years. If you guys would please help me in welcoming Michael and Laura Felix as they share their story. So, guys, first of all, thank you so much. I know that we talked about this a while ago, and we'll probably share some of that story, but I want a lot of people know who you are, but some people don't. So why don't we begin by telling us who are Michael and Laura Felix?
Good morning. My name is Laura Felix. I am a registered nurse at Winter Haven Hospital. I work in the cardiovascular operating room, and I am a wife to this guy.
Hi, I'm Michael Felix, the construction manager for Tucker Paving. I'm a Florida transplant. And
from Pennsylvania.
From Pennsylvania.
That's right. Man, Pennsylvania gets some love this morning.
He's not Amish, Ben.
You said it all.
So tell me a little about your story together. When did you guys meet? How long have you been married? All those pertinent details.
Well, first of all, just let me apologize if you're late to lunch. It's because we've got a couple stories within stories, and we're trying to be concise.
Absolutely.
But we met in 2007. I was getting ready to go back to my senior year in college at East Carolina, and he was down in Orlando on a business trip. And believe it or not, we met in the Orlando airport.
Wow.
Just standing in line, started talking. We didn't really exchange much information, and it was just kind of like, okay, have a nice life. And then probably about an hour and a half later or so, both of our flights to different places, me to North Carolina, him to Pennsylvania, got delayed.
Wow.
And we ended up, passing by each other again. And in the digital age, his question was, hey, do you have Facebook? Well, of course. And so he gave me his business card, and I looked him up on Facebook, and we became Facebook friends.
That's the modern day pickup line right there. Do you have
well,
Facebook?
The thing is that if you know him, he's kind of a shy guy. Mm-hmm. So I still find it strange that he just
put himself out there.
Yeah.
That's incredible. So how does all that transpire to dating, marriage?
So we we were Facebook friends, and then we were, we're going way back, AOL Instant Messenger friends, and just kind of kept in touch. And about 8 or 9 months later, he thought he was moving to Texas, actually, for work, and they moved him to Orlando. I've never seen somebody so devastated to move to Orlando. And inside, I was going, yes. So I graduated college, moved home. He had moved to Orlando for work, and we started dating. And then got engaged in the Orlando airport. So we're just a Lifetime movie waiting to happen.
So I got to ask that part of the story. Were you guys actually traveling somewhere, or did he say, let's go on a date to the airport?
I was coming home from my cousin's wedding. He was supposed to go with me, but couldn't because he said he had too much going on at work. And it was funny because I was with my family that weekend, and everyone was asking, oh, when are you getting married? And I was just like, never. This is quite a couple years in, and I knew that I loved him and wanted to marry him, but he had his own timing. And so the joke was on me when I came home, and he proposed to me as I came through security.
Wow. So everybody cheer.
Oh, he had an audience. Like, people set their bags down and did not go through security because they saw him with his sign and wanted to wait and see what happened.
That's incredible. Everybody get it for Michael. That's a good, man, Michael, that kills my story, I promise. Okay, so you guys get engaged, you get married. Now, I know for a lot of couples, when they get married, they want to have a honeymoon period of, we want it to be just us before we start thinking about kids. What was that like for you guys?
Well, there were things that had happened while we were dating, just conversations that we had, and we decided, we had this conversation really early on that we wanted to have children, that we would get married and we would have a family of our own, and that was just kind of an understood thing. So when we got married, my husband is very much a planner, and I was still in nursing school, so while we knew we wanted to have children, we didn't want them. We wanted them right away, but more so me, he would tell you. But there was a plan that we needed to get through. I needed to graduate nursing school, and, we just kind of needed to become financially stable, or, we were the prepare to have children, we got to be ready to have children people. So about a year and a half into our marriage, we decided to finally start trying. Or not preventing, or
Right. So Laura knows from the, and this is most of our stories, I think, as men and women, that you knew from day one that we're ready. Michael's the planner. He says we have to be ready for all of this. But a year and a half into the marriage, you guys say, okay, there's never a perfect time. There's never an ideal time. Now we're ready. But then it didn't happen right away, and you sensed early on.
Well, I'm a nurse, so I do know what the human body does and doesn't do, and very early on I realized that the things that needed to be happening necessarily with me and my body were not happening, and so I knew that we kind of had some obstacles that we were going to have to overcome. So I went to the doctor, and this is kind of where the obstacles just became magnified. I had a physician who was retiring and just wasn't really interested in helping. I tried to see someone else in his practice, and this doctor told me that I belonged to a different doctor and I'd have to wait a year until it was time to come in for a physical. And, I just was thinking, like, I pay for insurance and I need to see a doctor. Hello. But so enter God intervention. Number one, I left that practice and went to a different doctor that was outside of where they were. I'd never heard of him before, but heard wonderful things. And we went and saw him and just kind of had a discussion, and that led to some preliminary testing. I will tell you, with infertility, a lot of doctors want you to wait 1 year. They don't want to do anything before 1 year. And it had not been a year. It had been more like maybe 6 months. And he looked at me and he said, what I hear is that you're telling me you think that there's some issues, and it kind of sounds like there are, and I don't want to make you wait a year. So, like I said, we began the testing, and I was diagnosed with polycystic ovarian syndrome, which who knows what it is and who doesn't. I mean, basically it's just like a list of symptoms and things that go on in your body that nobody can explain that, among other things, lead to making getting pregnant and having a successful pregnancy very, very hard, and in some cases almost impossible. So that was pretty devastating. Not to mention, one of the things associated with polycystic is rapid weight gain, or the inability to control weight and things like that. And they would, doctors would just tell you, well, if you lose 10 pounds, it might get a little easier. Well, I'll be danged if I wasn't trying to lose those 10 pounds. I would have done anything, but that wasn't fixing my problem. So.
Absolutely. So obviously through this whole journey, I mean, you guys are just beginning to share what the journey looks like. But for you guys, faith is a valuable part of that. What role is faith playing at that part of the conversation?
Well, like we had the conversation about having children, we had also had the conversation of wanting our children to grow up in the church. Both of us grew up in church families. At the time as a couple, we were not attending regularly a church that we would say was our church. We would go occasionally with friends or with family, but we hadn't really found like a place that felt like our home, and I will say that as this story kind of started to unfold, there was a lot of anger at the world, and then really anger at God that made, whatever faith I had at the time kind of dwindle.
Absolutely. And we shared last week, if you're here for Brenda sharing her story, that I think God wants us to be honest. When we're frustrated, when we're struggled, it's a lot more important to be honest about the anger and frustration that we experience than putting on a facade and pretending everything's okay.
But that's hard too, because, you don't want to be caught being angry at God. And that, it feels wrong to be angry at someone who did so much for you, and this was one piece of my life. I had no reason not to be thankful for the many other blessings in my life, but I was angry.
Absolutely. So talk a little bit at that point. So you meet with the doctor. He starts to say it could be near impossible, but here's your options.
So the first thing that we started was oral medications, which basically, God bless my husband, was dealing with a crazy person on the daily. Things that would cause like crazy hot flashes and mood swings, not to mention vision changes. Just crazy, crazy things. But I kept doing it because this was going to get me my baby, So we started at one dose, and then we'd do X amount of rounds of that, and it wouldn't work. And then we'd go up a dose. And I remember when we hit one of the highest doses you could take of one of the oral medications, and they drew my blood, and they called and said, we think you're pregnant. And I was just thinking like, oh my gosh, Well, I wasn't. And not to mention, when you want a child and you don't have one and you happen to have a dog, your dog becomes your child. And then that same weekend, my dog tried to die. So wow. It was just like, okay, I can't have a fur child. I can't have a real child. Like, what is it, God? And I just remember like laying in a dark room all weekend long, just going, I don't get it. I don't get it, And so from there, when the oral medications weren't working, we switched to a different oral medication, and then added in, inseminations, which I don't know how much you know, and I don't want to give a biology lesson up here, but it takes what that God has set apart for a man and a woman in their marriage completely out of the equation of having a child. And that's really hard. We were talking, and marriage is hard in itself, and then you add in, infertility or financial issues and things like that, and it can break your marriage, and So we were kind of struggling with like all of these big things all at once, and then you take love out, we'll say love. You take love out of our marriage.
She's like, I'm in church, I can't say certain things.
Yeah, it's a little awkward. So, I mean, that in itself was really difficult too, and just felt very unnatural, and that was just kind of like another notch in the frustration and anger. And
So, Michael, give me a snapshot of how you're feeling at this point, because obviously this is important to both of you. I think as men we process things differently, but how are you feeling at that point in the journey?
My experience was very different. I'm probably like most guys, and I'm a fixer. And for most of you married folk out there know that doesn't usually help with an emotional woman. But it's my career and what I've been groomed to do to just solve problems, whether my own or the people that work for us. And so for me, fundamentally, emotionally reacting to an emergency or a problem doesn't ever work, and probably to some detriment with my personal relationships, that's kind of bled in. So, dealing with what we're doing, Laura's in a dark place. Perhaps the emotional aspect of the support wasn't there, but just seeing how she was, as the ship still needed a captain, we still needed to plan to move forward because we were going to come out of this unscathed. So, for me, it was more of like just roll up your sleeves and let's get through it. Probably the hardest thing for me was just to see what she was going through. I mean, I understood what it was, but I couldn't be the one sulking in the corner. I was trying to figure out how to make it all happen. And one day, I just finally came to her with a plan on how we were going to move forward with it, and her eyes just lit up. But the frustration up to that point was a lot.
Right, absolutely. So, I mean, the fortitude you guys showed, because at this point, it's not just the future of having a baby, it's your marriage that's at this crisis point.
Well, and he's talking about rocking in the corner, and literally I can tell you that he probably came home multiple days, and that's exactly what I was doing. In this time we had moved from seeing our local doctor. He had referred us to another doctor, another God intervention, because this doctor may have been the only one that recommended this other doctor. But when I was still dealing with my local doctor, I went in and just was telling him, like, I feel tired all the time. I feel cold all the time. Like, there's just something wrong. And, he had mentioned a few things throughout treatment, and we're probably about, I would say, maybe 2.5 years, maybe 3 years in. And he said to me, there is nothing medically wrong with you to explain this other than the fact that I do believe you are clinically depressed. And it's like, oh, great, I'm crazy now. And being a nurse, I know that there is a huge stigma around, mental health issues and depression and things like that, and that, it's things that sometimes people, even most, you can't help. But to tell me one more thing that was wrong with me, and I'm like, great, now my husband's wife is really crazy. And he was just like, and I'm no longer going to let you do this on your own. We're going to put you on medication. And that was just like devastating. So that day I remember very clearly crying on my bedroom floor, just in a ball, and he came home to see it, and just sitting there thinking, like, this is the wife that God has chosen for him, and this is horrible.
Wow.
But I didn't know what else to do. This was the way that I coped. Wow. Sorry. And it was about that time that like I said, we had moved over to our other doctor, and this is where the conversations about in vitro fertilization came in. And I don't know how much you all know about that, but it is a pay-as-you-go process. They want it all up front. There is no, payment plan, no, hey, we'll do it now, and you can pay later. And there's no coupon for it either. So when he says that, he had to come up with a plan to make this happen, he really did, because I remember, going over to the consultation and hearing that this is probably what was best for us, and they give you a price sheet. And it's like, this is probably what it's going to cost you. And then I was telling you this morning, they make you sign that price sheet saying, I've been presented with this information and I understand it. And I came home just thinking, holy cow. And just kind of retreating and thinking this was never going to happen. To me, IVF was a rich person thing, and if you know us, we're not rich.
Now, I asked him earlier about how much did all this cost, and Michael, you knew right away.
Well, yeah, that's because, like he said, he's the planner, and when he did come home after taking that very, very large total, I would say approximately all the things we've done, about $40,000. He came home and said, this is how we're going to make it happen. And that happened after he spoke with someone that he actually met in his industry. They became very good friends of ours, and they did IVF. So enter another God intervention. Wow. Because that friendship, he wasn't talking to me probably because I was such an emotional mess. But he did talk to our friend Steven, and whose wife was Lindsay, and they have a little boy. And that's when he came home with the plan, and I just kind of said, we're not done with this. Okay, let's go.
And I love that, because he's saying, I'm all in.
Yeah.
I figured this out, and we're going to do this, whatever the cost.
Our friend Steven said that when it came to his wife, it was either like we did this or we got a divorce, because he knew that it was eventually going to become a wedge that was driven in between them. And I don't think that would have been the case for us, but it definitely would have been something that probably created some bitterness and definitely didn't make things easier, made them only harder.
Right.
So Michael jumped all in and said, let's go.
So what happens?
So we go over to do our initial consultations and everything. This is with a doctor in Tampa, and of course they want more testing. And I'm like, well, we just did this with you like a year and a half ago. Cha-ching, but they want it now. So we started doing all of that, and then we had reached the point where it was ready to do our egg retrieval. And once again, I don't know what you know about IVF or not, but the medications are not like a Tylenol that you can take by mouth. These are shots. My husband is not a needles man. Being a nurse, I'm fairly comfortable around them, but he had to help give me a lot of these shots. And so we started injecting medications on a schedule to get ready to have my eggs retrieved. And we went in, I believe it was June 24th of 2017.
Okay.
And had retrieval that day, and then they take them and do their thing and let them grow. And by the end of the week, we had 5 embryos that were growing. And then they biopsied them to make sure that they were, genetically okay, because they wanted to prevent the possibility of miscarriage, which this is where, I kind of struggled, because I felt like I was trying to take control of a situation, just like Sarah and Abraham, where they kind of let a situation that they tried to control outgrow their faith. And I just kept thinking, there's nothing natural about this, Am I playing God by making these things happen and by scientifically testing them out and, all of this stuff? And this is just like another thing that you had to deal with in your mind. And I just kind of had to step back and tell myself that God gave people special gifts, and he gave the gift to the person who invented IVF, and he gave me the opportunity to see this doctor that led me to that doctor that sent me to this clinic that could do this for me. And I just had to tell myself, he'll stop you when he doesn't want you to.
Right. And it's about this point, if I remember correctly, you guys had started to come to Ridge Point.
We had started a little bit prior to
it
that.
Was Easter.
But yes, we came on Easter because we were Christeaster people. Christmas and Easter, we were there. But at this point, I was just so broken. I didn't know what else to do. And I remember telling our neighbor at the time, they don't live there anymore, unfortunately, but, they were just very strong support systems for us. I need to go to church. Like, I just need to go to church. I don't know what else to do. And she was like, well, then go to church. And I was like, well, I don't know where to go. And so the conversation just kind of ended there. And enter Allie Wooden, who I have known since high school, who's been doing my hair for however many years she's been doing hair. I'd say at least 10. And she had always talked about Ridge Point Church, and coming up talking about Easter this year in year 1, I probably was Allie's one. And just so you know, with your 1, don't give up. It may take a few years, but your 1 will eventually come to church. So I set up, like what service you go to, what time. I'm coming, look for me. And Michael and I showed up on Easter morning, and Allie was there waiting for us.
That's incredible. And then we had probably the most unusual Discover RPC ever.
Yes.
A couple weeks after that, but that's another story. But then we start to get connected. The thing I noticed early on is I'd heard a little bit of the story now, but then every week we're getting a connection card from you.
The only thing that I could do throughout this whole thing was pray. My prayers changed so much. Obviously, I was praying and praying and praying that God would give me a baby. And then after so many years, I prayed and prayed and prayed that God would take it away. Just take this desire away. I couldn't live with it anymore. And then once again, to be the wife of the man that you can't give a child to, I felt like I was failing him as a wife. And I remember telling him, you can find someone else that will give you this because it doesn't look like I can. I had read this book. It's called Pregnant with Hope, Good News for Infertile Couples. And this was kind of the catalyst that led God back into my life. And it talked about Sarah and Abraham, and, that's where I got the idea, was I trying to control? But I'll never let anyone borrow this book because I have spewed hate on these pages, but it was therapeutic for me. So instead of turning to the anger, I turned to running and I turned to God. And I just came to church every day and I prayed. And instead of praying for God, give me a baby, or God, take it away, I think you'll see on the connection cards that it turned into God's will for our family. Like whatever it is, just let his will be done, because I was tired. There was good news sprinkled into all this, because we had the 5 embryos, and 4 of the 5 embryos came back genetically sound and were our 4 opportunities. But then they found abnormal tissue in my uterus, and I ended up having to have a surgical procedure. And being a nurse, I said, oh, surgery, oh, scar tissue, oh, more problems, or, oh, cancer. You just don't know. And I just kept saying, like, God, let your will be done. And, just a side note this is like a span of 3.5, almost 4 years now. And during this time, there was so much that happened. I told you they wanted me to lose weight. And I was also clinically depressed. And then I picked up the habit of running. And that was how I dealt with my stressors. I met people along the way during my running, people who had gone through IVF, or people who just said, like, I'm going to pray for you. And actually one of the girls that I prayed with, she ended up having some issues too. And so we became like sisters in that. And I also switched jobs during this time. And I took a job that probably was a little more time consuming than the one that I had before. But it led me to the greatest thing that has ever happened to me in my career. I now work with surgeons who worship the Lord on a daily basis. I'm surrounded by employees who pray and who take care of the people that are around them, and we lift each other up, and we'll say, whatever it is, we'll make it happen. And knowing, like, if I had had a child at that point when I took that job, that never would have happened. I would have never agreed to everything that I was doing. So another God intervention.
There you go. So let's move forward a little bit in the story, because we're getting those connection cards. And then one day, no notice at all, I get a connection card that's vastly different.
Yeah, so the surgery went well. There was nothing, technically wrong with me that they could find. It was just benign tissue, and after giving it months of repair, they decided that it was okay to do a transfer. So we took one of the embryos, and they implanted it, and once again, that was more shots. And these shots would continue on if a successful pregnancy resulted for 10 to 12 weeks. So that happened, and about 5 days later, I found out I was pregnant. And so we didn't tell anyone, really.
Right.
Maybe just like the few prayer warriors that we had very close to us, because at that time your prayers change. And Allie would be one of those people.
Absolutely.
And so we came to church, and I just said, pray because we're pregnant. Like, it worked. I was in shock.
Yeah.
And I just remember singing, like, "You're a good, good Father" that day, and tears running down my face, and just lifting my hands up and hugging my husband and thinking, like, this is it,
Yeah, the journey's been so long, but we've gotten here. How are you feeling at that point?
Obviously it was a small piece of success, so I was ecstatic. I think she wanted to do a bigger reveal for me, but it kind of just spilled out one night.
Yeah.
And no, we were both excited. I mean, that's kind of what we've been working for a long time.
It seemed like the end of this incredible journey. In the book of Job, it says, God gives and God takes away, and blessed be the name of the Lord. Job had everything, and he lost everything. What happened?
On November 17th, I had the day off of work because we didn't have any cases, and I was tired because I was pregnant, and that's what happens.
Yeah.
And wasn't feeling that well, so I stayed home and just kind of was doing little things around the house, cleaning my house, and I just felt something, and I knew it wasn't right. And I called my local doctor and told him what happened, and I'm bleeding, and something's wrong. And he said, tell me a little bit more how you're feeling. I don't think it's anything real bad, but these are your options. And one of the options was to go to the emergency room. And when you've paid $40,000 for a child, you do not want another medical bill. So I was like, well, I'll wait it out. And then within the hour, it had gotten worse. And I remember just sending out messages to those warriors saying, like, I don't even know, to just pray. And instinctively, like, I knew right away, like, this is not good. But while I'm more of a pessimist, my husband is more of an optimist, and just kind of said, like, we don't know yet. Let's figure it out. And I called him home from work, and we went to the emergency room. And much later that night, we were told that there was not a viable pregnancy anymore. And on top of that, enter dog tries to die again. She ate raisins, highly toxic to your pets. If you ever have a dog that eats raisins, you need to call poison control. And knowing how attached I was to this crazy little dog, I said to Michael, like, go, you have to take care of this. And funny story is, I called him and told him, you know, the final news. And my mom was on her way up to the hospital to meet me. And he said, after I told him, he walked back into the vet and was like, don't you let that dog die. You know, like, if whatever you have to do, I don't know if you know, but you can sign an advance directive for your dog. So the dog didn't die, but it was a really hard, emotional night, and I just sobbed again. Husband comes home to rocking, sobbing wife in the corner, and I just didn't understand how you could journey through something for so long and have the greatest joy you could ever imagine. I mean, this was the culmination of almost 5 years, and have it just ripped away. I mean, it was such a hole inside of me. And at that time, Allie sent me a song by Shane and Shane, and it was Though You Slay Me, and at the end of it, John Piper talks in it. And I listened to this song on repeat probably for 3 days straight, just sobbing. And one of the things that it talks about is that, hang on, let me find it. I wrote it because I didn't want to forget it or screw it up. Sorry. It basically says that this momentary affliction it's not wasted, and that it's preparing for an internal weight of glory beyond all comparison, and just not to think that your pain is wasted, because it is not. You know, it is a part of a story, and the song tells you that though you have broken my heart, I am still going to praise you. And I enter my wonderful work team, who said, take the time that you need and come back when you're ready, and I did. And I just remember each one of them hugging me and holding me and letting me cry and letting me be sad. And one of the surgeons that I work with sent a couple of things to me and also shared them in devotions, and that is, we are able to shine the brightest when life is the darkest. And when we are crushed like grapes, we cannot think of the wine that we will become, but our joys are hidden in the sorrows. Wow. And I was in the middle of my sorrows.
Absolutely. The darkest of
100%.
Of all of it. Obviously, in the midst of all that, there are some voices that are building you up, some voices that probably are tearing you down. How hard was it to filter out the right voices at that point?
It was really difficult, and, you know, then it was just like, well, is this going to happen a second time, and what do we do? And, you know, there were people around me who said, like, I can't understand why God would do this to you. You know, faithful people who just said, I can't understand with you. And then there were other people who told me, you know, give it up. Like, this is not God's plan for you, and just stop. And they told me that by wishing for this so much, I was basically telling my husband that he wasn't good enough for me, that, you know, basically I couldn't be happy with the life that I had. And it was weird, because when the horrible things were said, I just laughed. You know, like, if the last almost 5 years haven't killed us, this isn't going to kill us or ruin us either. But it still was very hard, because I wanted to revert back to being very, very angry.
You were surrounded by a fierce tribe. I remember I saw just a little bit of someone got cross with you on social media, And the tribe, listen, don't get cross with her on social media, because the tribe just like attacked her for it.
Well, it's so weird because I had no idea what had happened. And like you said, these people just came out and were like, whoa.
Yeah.
I mean, Mama Cub stepped out and I was their little lion. And that's the weird thing about infertility is it will connect you to people that you have not spoken to in years, or people who don't live in the state with you, don't know you, but have heard about you. People in different countries that are praying for you. And I just was like, wow, look at all these people who I have backing us up and praying for us. And it was no longer like our baby, it was our baby.
So you guys don't give up.
No, a few months later, so that happened in November, and then they wanted to give us until after the holidays, and we go back in to start another round. And the really hard thing is that after it had happened, obviously had to go in for blood work and get everything back to kind of ground zero. And there's no hugs and like encouragement and whatever when you go to the doctor's office. It's like, okay, this is what we're going to do next, and you can decide, let us know, give us a call. And so I just was kind of like, So we left and we took the holidays just to kind of deal. And in January, we went back and started again all of the baseline stuff to get ready for another transfer. And on March 12th, we went in and had another one of our embryos implanted. And because I lack patience, I took my own tests at home. And on St. Patrick's Day last year, I found out that I was pregnant again. And I remember being really, really excited, and then I remember being really, really terrified.
Absolutely. The same thing could happen all over again.
Yeah.
How long was it? Because this time you guys do eventually announce it publicly. How long did you wait to make that decision?
Over 12 weeks.
Okay.
Because it wasn't easy. Like the week before my first ultrasound, I started bleeding again. Sorry to talk about that. But once again, it was just this impending doom. Like, here we go, God. It's happening again. Like, I don't understand. I called the same doctor locally and said, this is what's happening. He was out of town. I was all alone. I was at home cleaning my house again. I need a maid. Or I just need to stop taking days off of work, one or the other. And I went to the doctor, and I remember before going into the doctor, obviously at this point, I couldn't even cry. I just was kind of stone cold. And Elevation Worship's Do It Again came on, and I just listened to that song before I went into the doctor's office. And as I went in to see the ultrasound tech, and she asked, like, I have no idea what's going on here. I was just told I had to do this. Like, can you tell me what's going on? And I just kind of told her, I'm having some bleeding, and this has happened before, and this is an IVF baby, and I think it's bad. So I lay down, and she started to do the ultrasound, and that song just on repeat in my head. I've seen you move. Seen you move the mountains, and I believe that you're going to do it again. And I just, over and over and over. And, they don't show you any screens, because if it's bad, they want someone else to tell you that it's bad. And if it's good, they want to make sure it's good first before they show you. And I looked over at the screen on the wall, and there was just this little flickering heartbeat. And I just broke because he did it again, and
wow.
I just couldn't believe it. But then it said, why does it still have to be so hard? Why can't I just get pregnant, be fat for 9 months, and pop out a child? And it was just, I called him, I sent him a video, this is real. And then I went home and laid down until they told me I could go back to work, because I was just terrified, So we waited a really long time even to tell family, because we were afraid that things could happen. And then finally, We told some family members, and then family members couldn't keep some of the secrets a secret, so we decided that around close to Mother's Day, if we were going to share our story, it was going to have to be from us, and we had to do it now.
Yeah, and here's that photo.
So, 1,548 days we prayed for this baby, and I would do it all over again. I would shake and cry. I would inject myself. I would hurt. I would run. All of it.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
All of it.
Speaking of all the injections, can we show that photo as well here?
And that's just a fraction of them.
Yeah. Like just the incredible story that you guys have. So that's baby Lincoln.
It is, and hanging above his bed is 1 Samuel 1:27 through 28. And it's, I've prayed for this child, and the Lord has granted me what I ask of him. So now I give him to the Lord. For his whole life, he will be given over to the Lord. This is not our baby. Mm-hmm. This baby came from God and our tribe. They celebrated with us, and this is their baby too.
Absolutely. Both because of the power of this moment and also because of time, we're going to preempt the final song for the band. Just to let you know.
Sorry, guys.
This has been incredibly powerful. Is there anything else about your story that you just want to share?
If you're in a dark place, just keep going. The light is coming. If you need someone to talk to, we're here. Mm-hmm. It may be 1,500 days. It may be 50 days. But whatever it is, it's worth it. Yeah.
I remember I got a chance to go visit right after Lincoln was born and to bring some food, some different things. And we already had an idea that we're going to do this series at some point this year. And so I came to them and I said, hey, I don't want an answer now. Go home and pray, or we're at your house, but pray about this and come back and let me know. But would you be willing to share this story next year? And literally I said, don't give me an answer right away. And Laura right away.
Yes. Throughout this, God used the pain for good. Use it for good. If it's not for me, use it for someone else. And, I would dream about giving a sermon about this or something just totally out of character for me. Yeah. But just being able to share this with someone and to say, look at the glory that can come. The wound is where the light gets in. And I have a big gaping hole, but it is shining brighter than anything ever. And so he used it.
Yeah. It's one thing to see Lincoln up on the screen, but he's in service. Can we actually have Lincoln come to the stage right now? That'd be awesome if we could have him come on. Would y'all please go up for Michael and Laura?
By the way, the first Sunday we brought him here, JJ did 5 minutes of silence.
I got a text from Laura afterwards saying, you're testing our parenting skills to do that. There's so many times in the midst of darkness that we can't see what happens on the other side. And it's really easy in the midst of the darkness to get lost, to get confused, to not understand, God, why does all of this have to happen? But the joy on the other side is so much sweeter. And so I just want to do something different. I just want to do a prayer of just thanksgiving to God for what he's done in his family's life and for their perseverance. God, we're blown away by who you are. God, in the midst of darkness and devastation, you're there walking with us. We don't want it to hurt this much. But God, we also rejoice on the other side when we see these incredible stories of your provision. God, I thank you for Lincoln. I thank you for the joy that he's bringing to this family. And God, I pray that you bless not just him, but bless them. They've prayed for this child. They've prayed for this moment. And God, now they have a chance in this moment to share your goodness amidst their dark times, to share your goodness with the world around them. God bless his family in Jesus' name. Amen.